So welcome to another edition of the Indie Jigsaw Show, and this one's called Welcome to Scotland. We're going to be looking at just how welcoming are we here in Scotland to those people from all over the world who come here either as asylum seekers, or they come for a job, but coming from another country, they want to make their home and their work here in Scotland. So we've got a whole range of interviews. Our main guest is Elena Whitham. Elena was the deputy leader of the East Ayrshire Council until recently. Last year she was elected to Holyrood, and she's the MSP for Carrick, Cumnock and Doon Valley. So we'll be talking to Elena about, we start off talking to her about a recent debate in Holyrood about the UK Borders and Immigration Bill, and not to give anything away here, because you probably know this already, but Holyrood voted not to give consent to that bill. So in the first snippet we have with Elena, she's just telling us what the background to that was and how that all came about. I'm really looking forward to showing you that interview, but before that, Fiona, do you want to tell us about the other snippets, because they came from an event that you went down and took some footage of, didn't you?
I did, yes. Saturday in Glasgow was, many other places across the world were taking part in the UN Stand Up to Racism Day. And so in Glasgow, there was a demo and a rally in George Square. So I was there helping Independence Live with live streaming the event. And we're going to have a look at just a roundup of some of the speakers. There was about 20 or so excellent speakers. Obviously, we couldn't show you them all, but we've just picked out a little representative sample. So we've got 4 speakers and a little bit of footage of the march entering George Square. So enjoy that, and we'll come back and we'll join Elena.
Refugees are welcome here. Stay alive, stay alive. Refugees are welcome here. Stay alive, stay alive. Refugees are welcome
Ordinary people across Europe have reacted with compassion to the plight of Ukrainians, yet we have a racist Tory government that draws arbitrary lines between Syrians, Africans, Afghanis, Ukrainian refugees, that one day tells us that politics cannot mix with sport, that one day tells us we cannot fly Palestinian flags, and the next day these leaders drape themselves in blue and yellow. In 2015, Europe's leaders screamed about a migrant crisis against the 1.4 million refugees fleeing war in Syria. Yet the same countries have absorbed 2 million Ukrainians within days. No rubber dinghies, but free tickets on the Eurostars. What is the difference? Europe never had a migrant crisis. It had a racism crisis. 3-year-old Island Cardi was not the first child to drown. needlessly on Europe's doorstep. Thousands of refugees are trapped in Ukraine, but there are also many island Kurds who continue to die in our water. Across Europe, there are 11 million empty homes. Fill them with the homeless, fill them with any refugee, whatever colour they are. If you want to root out racism, then dismantle that brutal regime of border fences, of detention centres and deportations. Deal with the killer cops who act with immunity. Deal with the racists who strip church of black school children. And nor should we absolve our own politicians, knee deep in the blood of thousands drowned by Europe's border controls, while Boris Johnson wines and dines Saudi crown princesses for more arms sales and oil. We need to harness the spirit of Kenmure Street, those moments when a community came together and said, these are our neighbours, let them go. That moment I still remember when I stepped into Priti Patel's deportation van and the door was open to 2 Indian men. And I said to them, you are free because of the people of Glasgow. That power of the people rests in every community, in every city, in every country to fight for freedom. That should give us hope. It should give us hope that one day our children will have a future where their lives are lived by the Stephen Lawrences, the Imran Khans, the Chris Donalds, the Simon San, the Ivan Sheikhs, the Sheikh Ubayos, the Farzad Dags, and all the island Kurds, that they will be commemorated for the lives that they lived rather than lost. Thank you.
20 years ago, our charity set up Room for Refugees, a refugee hosting network, in response to the government failure to provide shelter to destitute refugees under their forced dispersal programme. A handful of volunteers took part in that programme and took people into their homes. We were told that we were fools and we shouldn't be taking refugees or asylum seekers into people's houses, and that we were creating risks. Today, and since then, we have provided shelter to over 4,000 refugees, 16,000 fully registered hosts, people who are offering space in their homes, and we've built an online platform capable of matching host families with people in need. Over 500 refugee organisations refer their most vulnerable asylum seekers, refugees, to our organisation. They include the British Red Cross, the Scottish Refugee Council, Freedom from Torture, but that's 500 organisations, and it was built up over 20 years. This refugee hosting network was pioneered in Scotland, and I have to say something. It really upsets me to see that even the Scottish Government has never celebrated the fact that Scotland pioneered Room for Refugees with 20,000 hosts. Has never. We're part of a worldwide movement that we're committed to building a modern-day underground railroad of dedicated people who are defying the indifference of governments to the global refugee crisis by lending a helping hand to men, women and children. So that programme has helped people through the destitution crisis for asylum seekers from Syria, from Afghanistan, from Iran, from Eritrea, from Yemen since 2002. We've helped people during the Park Inn tragedy in 2020, the Syrian refugee crisis in 2015, during the Afghan crisis in 2021, the Serco evictions in 2019, and now the Ukraine crisis. These are refugees. But we're concerned about the UK government's Homes for Ukraine sponsorship scheme. On an industrial scale, the UK government has gathered 156,000 signatures and expressions of interest and goodwill from members of the public. They've asked you to volunteer to provide homes in there. And only now the government has admitted that only a tiny fraction of those people will ever see a Ukrainian refugee. Not only that, instead of gathering people's signatures, they've ignored every refugee hosting network in the country. They haven't spoken to refugee organisations, and unfortunately, and I have to say it because you have to call it out, the Scottish Government is now on an industrial scale gathering signatures from people. It's got one step further in that they're saying they will connect you to refugees, but the expertise for that lies with charities. And we would not encourage you to go and give your names and your personal data to government organisations to host refugees, because there are networks already, and there's a pioneering network called Room for Refugees, and if you just go onto the website you can register. These organisations should be bringing in refugees, whether they're Ukrainian, whether they're Afghan, and I hope that this programme is going to be in place for the Afghans, for the Syrians, for the people from Yemen, for the people from Iran, for every colour of person that needs to come here, because the truth is, brothers and sisters, only a tiny fraction of the world's refugee population actually wants or needs to come to the UK. We're not all desperate to come here, and that's what we need to remember. We've had people turn around and say, I will only take a Ukrainian refugee, not any other nationality. We've had people who say, I will only take a Ukrainian orphan. So what do you want? Do you want their mother and father dead in order that you can take? This is not about you hosting. This is about people's lives depending on being able to get into this country and host refugees. So thank you very much.
It's easy to be downhearted because of what we see day in and day out. But then I come here and I'm reminded that in the worst of times we see the best of humanity. And you are the best of humanity. And this square represents the best of humanity. And this city represents the best of humanity. And when I think about this square, I think about decades ago when the British establishment was calling Nelson Mandela a terrorist. The people of this city went just a stone's throw from here to what was then St George's Place, where the South African apartheid consulate was based, and they changed the name of the street, and it remains to this day a testament to that great man, Nelson Mandela. And it remains a testament to you and our forefathers and our foremothers who took on racism in that day. And when I get downhearted and when I feel despair, I remember when I stood here, when we were seeing pictures of Syrian refugees drowning, washing up their lifeless bodies on beaches, and the West, and I say that purposefully and on purpose, when they turned their back on those refugees, we stood here. I remember the day, and it was I was going to say pissing down the rain. Can I say that? Was that unparliamentary? It was raining, it was dreeking, it was absolutely dreeking, and we stood here and we said to those refugees and all refugees, you are welcome here and this is your home. So I want to leave you with that message, that as difficult as times are, as downhearted as you can be, remember, it is in the darkest of nights that the lights shine the brightest, and you are those lights. And I was sick to my stomach when I saw Michael Gove suggest that when it comes to refugees and immigration, that somehow the UK has been, in his words, a generous country. Go ask the Windrush generation if they feel that this country has been generous. Go ask those in Dungavel if they feel like this country has been generous. Go ask every person that has seen a go-home van whether this country is generous, and go ask anybody but anybody who has been a victim of the hostile environment whether or not this country has been generous. Let me end by giving a message to our Ukrainian friends. Whether you have been here for a day or for generations, let me just say that this country is your country, that we want you to feel welcome here, that your loss is our loss, your tears are our tears, your suffering is our suffering. And I am so proud of every single person in Scotland and right across the UK that has opened up their hearts, and their homes to those refugees, because it is the right thing to do. But of course, does it not expose once again the institutional racism of the British government? Where are the homes for the Afghan refugees? Where's the £350 a month for the Syrian refugees? So let's say it loud, let's say it clear. Whether you're white, whether you're brown, whether you're black, whether you're Syrian, whether you're Afghan, whether you're Ukrainian, whether you're Muslim, whether you're Jew, whether you're Christian or agnostic, you are welcome here, and Scotland is your home.
I want you to look at your right-hand side and see what you see. You see a human being. When you turn to your left, you see a human being. There is nothing like racism. We only have one human race on the planet. It's a man-made world. I want to let's wake them up. It's ignorant behavior. It's lack of intelligence. It's lack of ideology that they have. They've been built in their own mind to divide us. I can see people with a darker skin, with a pale skin, with a beautiful skin. We are all beautiful together. We are all one human being. Racism is the most dangerous virus in the world. When you were born, no one told you how to treat other people different because of the color of their skin. It is a disgrace that people become so dumb. Go home and tell them shame on them. I want everybody to say shame on you. Shame on you. Shame on you. Do you know why we have to tell them shame on them? We are stronger than ever. The government, the individual, the community who think because of people's color of skin, you're going to treat us differently, we will stand shoulder to shoulder and we will fight it every day until I stop breathing. I originally come from Nigeria. Where I grew and come from in Nigeria, we don't talk about the color of skin. We talk about your kindness, your compassion, your ability to love every human being. How do you go to your bed and sleep when you know you make other person different and treat other people differently just because of their skin color? You've ever seen animals or cats or dogs all come in the same color? No. There's a reason why the nature makes us in different species, because it's beautiful. When I look at the variety of human beings in front of me, nobody is the same. We're all different. Therefore, we have the ability to make a change. We make a change in our own way we speak to other people. We make a change the way we treat our children and bring them up on how to behave and stop calling people names. How freaky would it be today if you come in here and everybody's like me? You'll be freaking out, isn't it? I am a proud woman. Why? Because nobody gives me any definition that because I'm a dark skin color, I should feel lesser. Nobody tell me that the person that's a pale white skin should feel lesser. It's a man-made world. The word racism is not made by nature, it's a man-made word to divide us. We will not let anybody divide us. I say shame on you and thank you very much. God bless you all.
Hope you enjoyed those clips. If you want to see them, they're all going to be on our Indie Life Extra YouTube channel.
Those were such good clips that I've put together, Fiona. So that gets us to the next part of the show, and it's the first part of the interview with Elena Whitham. So here it is. This particular edition is all about immigration, citizenship, and I'm now going to be talking to Elena Whitham, who was elected to Holyrood last year, and she is the MSP for Carrick, Cumnock and Doon Valley. Thanks very much for coming on the programme, Elena. What we'd like to talk to you about is the background and what happened during the debate that took place in the Parliament recently about the UK Borders Bill. It's a Westminster bill, but there was a debate happening about it in Holyrood. So could you just give people sort of broad background as to why some UK bills come up to the devolved parliaments and some don't?
Yeah, I mean, can be a really tricky thing to get your head around. So the UK and Parliament, the Scottish Parliament, both make laws for Scotland. And that's just part of the fact that we're not an independent country at the moment. So usually the Scottish Parliament will make laws on issues that are devolved to Scotland, and Westminster will make laws on issues that are reserved. And those are laws that apply to the entirety of the UK. Sometimes the UK Parliament will make laws for Scotland on devolved matters. What the Scottish Parliament can make laws about, so that's about legislative competence, and also the powers of the Scottish ministers. So they have the ability to do that. And if they do that, the laws usually only pass if the Scottish Government gives consent. And most people kind of know this as the Sewell Convention. So when the Parliament's ready to debate on a memorandum, the Scottish Government prepares a legislative consent motion and asks the Parliament if it agrees to the UK Parliament to be able to make a bill that applies to Scotland, and MSPs can vote on that. And this has got to happen before the bill goes through its last amending stage in the UK Parliament.
Oh, right. So it's possibly, it can put a stopper on that going through Westminster. Is that right?
Sometimes it can, but that really, I think, usually depends on what the Lords are going to do. So sometimes it feels as if the Lords have a lot more power than we do in Scotland in these matters. And unfortunately, back in 2017, the UK Supreme Court had actually decided that the Scottish Parliament doesn't have a legal enforceable veto. So this essentially means that they can decide to overrule the decisions that we come to in our Parliament.
Yeah, to be fair to the Lords, actually, sometimes I think the Lords are a much more civilised place of debate than the Commons is. They'll come up with amendments to bills in exactly the way that certainly me would like to see them doing it.
Absolutely would agree with that. And I think sometimes we've seen evidence of that, recently. And we can see that how the Lords have tried to amend this bill specifically as well, the borders.
Yes. So it's UK borders and immigration. So those are reserved matters. But yeah, it was debated in Holyrood.
So the Scottish Government assessed that there was two areas with provisions that relate to devolved matters and that they would actually have a negative impact on Scotland. So you've got Clause 49, which is round about age assessments, whether that's refugees or asylum seekers that are coming to the UK. And you have Clause 58, which is round about modern slavery and human trafficking. And it was assessed that both of these would actually step on devolution. So age assessment, we know that, in our opinion up here, and the opinion is shared by, if I think about Glasgow Health and Social Care Partnership, who gave evidence to the Social Justice and Social Security Committee that I convene, they said they absolutely believe that this will interfere with devolution, because it's up to those that know these young people well to make these assessments. And in their opinion, that's our social workers in Scotland. Now, social work is completely devolved to Scottish Parliament, and Scottish local authorities take that up on our behalf. And in terms of Clause 58, which is round about modern slavery and human trafficking, that clause actually asks that the competent authority making the decision, so if we think about that, might be Scottish courts, that could be social work, here that could be the police, they actually have to take account of late provision of information as damaging to a person's credibility. Now that's been roundly seen as being absolutely an abhorrent clause to put into this bill. And I think as well, and many people agree with me, that if we look at this through a gendered lens as well, this disproportionately impacts women. We know that women are trafficked far more often than men, usually into horrible situations. So there's several reasons why that's is just not the way to go. So these two clauses were agreed by the majority of our Parliament, except for the Conservative benches in Scotland, that this actually impacted on devolution. So we agreed as a Parliament that we wouldn't accept this, and we would not give the consent that was being requested.
Yes, yeah. So as it stands, the bill, those two clauses, does that mean that those assess, whether it's age assessment or the impact on the modern slavery side, does that mean that decisions would be made about people living up here in Scotland, but the decisions about them would be made by bodies that are based down in England. Is that?
Yeah, so the first one, the clause round about age assessments, the bill creates a National Age Assessment Board, which they call the NAB. And that means that social workers up in Scotland that make decisions round about young people in their care who are asylum seekers or refugees, they actually have to refer that decision to that assessment board, and they have the right to scrutinise it, and they have the right to request different types of determinations. So whether they're looking at things like bone, density, X-rays, etc., which is roundly not seen as the right way to go and subject to interpretation. They've got the right to overrule decisions that are made up here by our professionals who have that competence to do that. They've been doing it for a long time. Our social workers are trusted to do those things. They know these young people best. So they've got the right to overturn decisions up here.
The Modern Slavery Act, part of it, how is that also decisions being taken elsewhere outside of Scotland?
What it means is part of that we're kind of to and fro about, that we don't agree with, is the fact that any late information that's presented by an individual who is saying that they have been trafficked, if it's late coming, it has to be seen as a negative. And that's going to impact on people's cases. When
you say late coming, you mean added into the argument a bit later, just further on in time?
Absolutely.
Yeah,
now,
okay.
I worked for Women's Aid for over a decade with traumatised women and children fleeing domestic abuse. And a lot of the time, these things don't come forward until somebody feels comfortable, until somebody feels as if they're believed, they're in a safe place. So to actually treat that late coming information as being negative, that's just a disgusting way, frankly, to actually treat people who have experienced some of the most horrific circumstances, and again, disproportionately affecting women.
That's definitely how it seems. It seems like it's taken the, the kind of more compassionate-hearted approach to dealing with, what are in both cases very difficult situations. If the bill goes ahead as it is, actually that's going to be much less of a compassionate response to people and way of just dealing with people, actually, than we could have otherwise. And that's a bit depressing, isn't it?
To me and to the Scottish Government, the bill blatantly breaks the UK's international obligations under the UN Convention relating to the status of refugees. And it proposes to change laws to criminalise people who seek asylum on the basis of their mode of travel. So again, that's wrong. The bill is set out in such a way that, I understand that the desire to break down these rings that they have of human traffickers who are trying to make money off of getting people over to where people are seeking to be. But this actually makes the UK an outlier. It makes the UK a kind of a pariah to me in terms of the way that we treat people who are seeking safety. And I think that that's absolutely wrong.
Yes, and it certainly, as you've pointed to, it's certainly had an awful lot of criticism. I mean, even I was just kind of reading around it a little bit, knowing that we were going to be talking about it today. But I came across there's a 5-minute little video made by a woman who's a UN representative, and she's just basically pulling the whole thing apart and saying what a bad bill it is. Scottish Law Society, Scottish Refugee Council, and the Good Law Project people in England, they're all coming out really strongly against it, which is quite something. I mean, you do see that happening every now and again, but for such a tranche of, the people who really know about what's good practice and all to be coming out about it, that's quite striking, I think.
Absolutely. I mean, and I've got a quote here from, the UN Special Rapporteur on Trafficking Persons, and they said, if adopted, it would seriously undermine the protection of human rights of trafficked persons, including children, increased risk of exploitation faced by all migrants and asylum seekers, and lead to serious human rights violations.
Having mentioned in the interview there that the UN spokeswoman has come out and said what she thinks are the huge drawbacks to the UK Borders Bill, we thought we'll let you listen to the whole of what she said. It's not very long, it's about 5 minutes, really worthwhile watching and listening.
The Nationality and Border Bill that is entering its final stages in Parliament is cause of great concern to us. Among other things, it establishes a two-tier refugee status that risks leaving the overwhelming majority of refugees coming to the UK without proper set of rights according to the Convention. The vast majority would be, of course, individuals who would arrive after having traveled sometimes for weeks or months over land. And having crossed through various countries would be generally deemed by the government to fall into Group 2. Being in Group 2 would have far-reaching consequences for the individuals concerned. Group 2 refugees would be denied social benefits unless destitute. They would be denied family reunion. They would be kept in a situation of enforced precariousness. If this bill were to be implemented, you could easily imagine refugees being recognized and receiving no assistance. How would they survive? Finding a job, nobody finds a job that allows them to support themselves within a short period of time. You could, for example, have single mothers unable to access publicly funded creches and therefore being unable to work. You could think about children being denied school meals where those are dependent on the benefits that the parents receive. We are very concerned that the Nationality and Borders Bill will breach international law and will cause a huge amount of personal suffering in people who are guilty of no more than seeking asylum. Contrary to popular belief, the vast majority of people do not want to come to the UK or to Europe for that matter. The overwhelming majority of refugees remain in the countries neighboring their own. That's about 75%. And close to 90% remain within their own regions. So those who actually travel further afield, coming to Europe or to the UK, are actually a very small number. The Refugee Convention does not require refugees to seek asylum in the first safe country they encounter, and it does not allow states to discriminate between the refugees depending on the way of arrival. Under refugee law, an asylum seeker is not illegal if it enters into a country and presents himself to the authorities. But of course, if you are breaking the law by simply arriving, that means that you have broken the law before you even meet the official. And theoretically, you could get 4 years for that. The vast majority has no choice but traveling through unsafe routes. Most people do not realize that it's virtually impossible to take a plane and come to the UK or indeed to many other countries in order to seek asylum. And we know that where family reunion is not allowed anymore, we will see more women and children taking the dangerous routes in order to reunite with their families. International law lives or dies by states' willingness to comply with it and to hold each other accountable for it. The Convention aims to provide protection to persons fleeing persecution and to allow them to integrate in new countries of asylum, essentially to rebuild their lives in safety somewhere else. The Refugee Convention was open to signature in 1951, and it is a fundamental instrument aiming to protect those people who are forced to flee by persecution. It remains a very relevant instrument today because, of course, persecution is unfortunately very much the experience of so many people in the world. We do have a problem, however, with certain kinds of arrangements that are meant really to essentially allow wealthier countries to offload their asylum seekers and their refugees on countries that usually have far more refugees and far fewer resources. These are often programs that aim at deterring refugees from going to the richer countries, and in our experience have often been shown to result in refugees being really shunted in very, very dire living conditions, and very often in situations where their human rights were very severely threatened. A better way to address the asylum system, we believe, would be working on making the procedures faster and more effective, with a view to ensuring that refugees are quickly identified and helped integrate, while those who have no protection-related reasons can be returned to their own countries. It's also necessary to have an agreement with France and the European Union to ensure that those who do not have legitimate reasons to seek asylum in the UK may be returned there.
To carry on with the interview with Elena, the next part of the conversation that we have with her, she's just talking about the distinctions between refugees, migrants, and indeed expats. And Helena, as a young girl, went with her family over to Canada, so she has some experience of what it's like to move from one country to another. Here she is.
So this isn't just SNP parliamentarians up in Parliament taking a position for a position's sake. This is cross-party, except for the Conservatives, and this is from so many segments of civil society, as you've already mentioned, and that's why it beggars belief that even if it's amended by the Lords, it's still going to pass, because unfortunately, it doesn't matter what the Scottish Government, the Welsh Government say. If we withhold consent, that's not necessarily binding for them.
Yes, that's what I was going to ask next, actually, because that vote in Holyrood, I mean, it was 94 to 29, and as you said, the 29 are all members of the Scottish Conservative Party. So they were voting, therefore, to consent to it. Yourselves, Labour Party, Lib Dems were all voting to withhold giving consent, and obviously that, well, I think that vote has it carries a sort of symbolic weight.
Yeah.
But will it make any difference?
No, unfortunately, if they choose to proceed with it, they have the numbers within Westminster Parliament that they'll be able to pass it. Again, it's whether we can, whether the Lords get amendments through that are going to help. But, this is a Conservative government that's pandered to that anti-immigration rhetoric for so long. And, that we know that that's been made worse since Brexit. And they're hiding behind their rationales that's going to make the system fairer and more effective, so we can better protect and support people in genuine asylum need, to deter illegal entry and to remove those with no rights to be here. But underneath all of that, to me, there's a real xenophobia. And I think if we juxtapose that with what we're seeing just now in terms of the outpouring, rightfully, in my opinion, of welcoming people from Ukraine here, to me that just paints a picture as it will pick and choose who we feel is worthy of seeking refuge here, and I don't think that's right. I think we need a system that's actually designed to recognise everybody that needs a place of safety, and that plays our part on the whole world stage in terms of that. We all have obligations, and that's why we have refugee treaties across the world in light of the Second World War. So this bill stamps all over all of that.
This government down in the UK, it's got a bit of a habit of ignoring UK treaties. I mean, it's obviously ignoring the one about refugees. It's also ignoring the one about nuclear arms proliferation one as well, by kind of going ahead and getting more nuclear warheads in place. Anyway, that's for another programme. So it probably, there's a symbolic kind of weight to that vote in Holyrood, and also, I mean, there was a similar vote down in Cardiff as well, also withdrawing consent, but it looks like it will go ahead anyway, because they've got the votes in the voting lobbies. You've touched on, there is a problem down in the Channel. There is a problem. I mean, the problem isn't necessarily the refugees themselves wanting to come in, but the way that they're brought in, and those kind of, obviously people that made loads of money by bringing them over in boats and endangering people's lives. I mean, you can see there's a problem that needs to get tackled. Could you think, do you think there's another way of doing it?
It's difficult because sometimes we treat people in different ways. So we can, there's a rhetoric around about people being migrants. And a lot of these people are migrants for perhaps economic reasons, but also for conflict. And they seem to get lumped into one pot. So if I think about my own family, so I'm a dual national, I'm a Canadian and, a Scot. And we went to Canada when I was 6, and we went to Canada when I was 6 as economic migrants because of Margaret Thatcher's policies. So, my dad listened to the calls from Canada. They needed metallurgist engineers, and away we went. But it's different, I think, sometimes because I'm called an expat. And that's roundabout the way that we actually sometimes have that xenophobic look around the world. So if we think about, the UK having lifted the drawbridges in terms of their immigration policy, there's no other way for people to get here sometimes than by those methods that they're using, because the UK has a kind of a belief system whereby they need to claim asylum or in the first country they arrive into. Well, unfortunately, these countries have taken far more than their share of people who are in these circumstances, and we in this country, if we still want to call the UK a country, we've got to take our share of people who are seeking asylum. After all, I think we've sent the most people around the world ourselves, right? So there's a moral argument about it. So I think all of the rhetoric and all of the hostile immigration policies that have been employed over these last decades have actually led us to this point, and they've created that system whereby people are having to put themselves into the hands of traffickers and put themselves on boats and put themselves in danger. So for me, Priti Patel to turn around and say that she's trying to do something to address this and break these gangs, they created the gangs.
Yeah. And sort of even more galling and ironic, given Priti Patel's own family background of coming, the family moving here from Uganda.
Absolutely. I mean, I'm hyper aware of that myself, being a dual national and being a migrant. And I'll always call myself a migrant because I think that the more that people, recognize that, we weren't expats, we weren't extending the empire or whatever people want to see it as. We were seeking, economic betterment because of the situation we had at home. And that's a lot of that's reflected in some people that we see seeking the same thing nowadays, but we just don't treat them the same way.
Now we're going to go over to Mohammad Asif, who was one of the speakers at the Paisley All Under One Banner March. And Mohammad came to this country as a refugee. He shares his experience of what that's like in a way that we just can't comprehend, I think, unless you've been in that situation. So let's have a look and see what Mohammad said at Paisley.
Thank you, brothers and sisters. Firstly, on behalf of my family and the family of independence, let's send our support and solidarity to the people of Ukraine. Brothers and sisters, I can feel the pain of Ukrainians because when Putin was only 27 years old and the USSR invaded my country, Afghanistan, with the Red Army, killed 1.9 million Afghans, destroyed our country. Until today we are suffering because of Russia. So when I see the women and children especially running for shelter from Putin bombs, it reminds me of my childhood when we did the same, running away from the Russian bombs. But brothers and sisters, there is a hypocrisy with the Western world. I saw Boris 4 days ago calling Putin a war criminal. No doubt about it, Putin is a war criminal. He's a mass murderer. But there is a man maybe 10 or 15 miles away living from Boris Johnson called Tony Blair, who killed 1 million Iraqis along with Bush and NATO's, and that man is not called war criminal. But we do not have to be selective. Brothers and sisters, today an independence is even more important when we see the war in Ukraine. I came to this country as a refugee from Afghanistan, running away from the likes of Taliban. The British went to war and many Scottish kids were killed and I took part in their funerals in Scotland. But 20 years later, Boris and Biden handed over Afghanistan to the same terrorists or the bunch of barbarian killers, Taliban. Brothers and sisters, when we talk about refugees, I have every sympathy with the Ukrainians because I have been through in my life, my family, my parents, my relatives, my country, women and children. But when we talk about refugees, we do not have to be selective. When the Western politicians, the media, the major media and pundits calling the Ukrainians civilized, yes, they are civilized because they are human beings, and they are telling us that we are, the Iraqis, the Syrian, the Libyan, the Afghans are uncivilized, as though our life is very, very cheap. We have been bombed for many, many years by NATO, by the Russians, by the Americans. Brothers and sisters, we need an independent Scotland which says no to illegal wars, which says no to illegal invasion, which says no to nuclear weapons, which says no to Trident, which welcomes everybody like myself, who is a new Scot, although I'm getting old in this country now. I have been here for 22 years. When Britain and the right-wing media and the Tories come on television blaming asylum seekers for every problem in Britain, brothers and sisters, if we want less refugees, Britain and NATO, Putin and others should bomb less countries. Welcome refugees in Scotland because they are just human beings, just like me and you. I gave you one example. Let's think, 1.5 or 2 years ago, did we not fight for a pack of pasta? Did we not fight for a packet of paracetamol or over a toilet paper because we wanted to protect our children? We want to feed our children. So the same is with refugees. When the bombs are dropping in Ukraine, in Afghanistan, in Iraq, in Libya, and Syria, when the British bombs made in Scotland, killing innocent Yemeni women and children, especially in Yemen, the Saudis, the biggest weapons buyer from Britain, is killing innocent women and children in Yemen. The weapons made in Scotland. Scotland needs to stop this. Scotland needs to divorce this abusive marriage. So let's fight, keep the fight. Thank you very much. Thank you.
It's complex.
As Mohammad said, though, if we want to stop the tide of refugees, maybe we should stop bombing their countries.
That's a pretty telling thing to say to those Western countries that have been doing that. So to finish off the interview, I asked Elena, what's her future vision for Scotland? What is it that she'd really like to be part of making happen for Scotland, and in particular about citizenship and immigration? But looking ahead a bit, I'm looking ahead to 2023. This program in the Jigsaw, Elena, we have one basic assumption that the program's built on, and that is that by the end of 2023, Scots will have voted to regain our independence. So if that was to happen, I'm not even going to cross my fingers because we can make it happen. If that was to happen, there you are, an MSP now sitting in Holyrood. You would be part and parcel of the first, independent parliament over there, with actually an awful lot of work to do. I mean, I can understand that, but just to keep on the subject of immigration, I mean, what basic approaches to citizenship, immigration, how to treat asylum seekers would you like to see, our independent country developing and taking forward over the next, take a while, won't it, but decade?
I mean, we can already see, I think, shoots of that kind of system that we want. So where we do have the power, we've extended the right to vote. So we've extended the right to vote to people who are 16, but we've also extended the right to vote to people who are here for whatever reason, right? So if they're here as asylum seekers, if they're here as refugees, if they're here, we're treating them as new Scots and we're extending that right to vote for them. So, a lot of these people are now going to be able to vote in the upcoming council elections, which I'm quite passionate about people getting registered to vote. So that shows you just the kind of model of a system that we're looking to have. I was the community wellbeing spokesperson for the Convention of Scottish Local Authorities for a number of years, and actively tried to engage the UK government in terms of allowing Scotland to have some devolution of immigration policy and powers, because we know that, you know, our occupation shortage list, so where we need people to come into Scotland, is very different than what it is in the rest of the UK. And it can vary greatly between Scotland as well. So what we maybe need down here in Ayrshire is maybe going to be very different to what they need in you know, Highlands area, etc. So I've always argued that we should have our own shortage occupation list, and we should be able to have people into Scotland in a different way. So that already works like that in Canada. You know, the provinces within Canada,
yeah.
They can actually decide in a different way how they want to treat immigration. So in a independent Scotland, I think we look at, you know, we have the ability to look at that and shape it ourselves. And we have the ability to say, you know, we're going to recognise the refugee treaties that are around the world and actually, you know, play our role in helping people to get to a place of safety and to become new Scots, because we have a new Scots strategy here, and it's very different to the rest of the UK. And that is led by, you know, the Convention of Scottish Local Authorities migration team. They're just fantastic in doing that work. And local authorities up and down the country have worked with the Scottish Government to make people as welcome as they possibly can be. So I think our system, and, you know, an independent Scotland's immigration system is going to be based around, you know, human rights, dignity, fairness and respect. And I think that those are things that shine across all the things that we try to do in the Scottish Parliament so far, whether that's social security, whether that's going to be independent Scotland with its own immigration policy. It's not going to be that hostile environment. Obviously, it can't just be a free-for-all. There's going to have to be some parameters round about that, but it's certainly not going to be the system that's in place at the moment.
Yeah, yeah. Do you think we're as good at welcoming immigrants into Scotland as we think we are?
I think policy-wise, yeah. I think policy-wise, I think human being-wise and community and that kind of social discourse way, probably not. There's a huge amount of work that still needs to be done there. I think there's still elements of xenophobia within Scottish society. We can see that if we look at the cesspit that can be social media, etc. There is still a rhetoric of people who will, you know, say, let's look after our own first. Yeah. But to me, it shouldn't be an either or. You know, we have enough, you know, capacity for it to be both. It's about us having the full levers of power as an independent nation, like every other normal country around the world, right? Independence is normal. But we choose then what to do with those powers, and we choose how to shape that. And I think without one hand tied behind our back, you know, xenophobia is born out of people believing that, you know, their situation's impacted by those that are other. So, you know, we do have deep-seated poverty that we're trying to address. We do have health inequalities. We have all of these things that are legacies from years of you know, subjugation, basically. You know, Scotland's been not allowed to be, you know, to address the issues that it's needed to address. To turn that boat around, that's like trying to turn the Titanic, and especially if you don't have all the powers. So I think with independence will come a dismantling of xenophobia once we're able to address all of those things in turn. So I think we couldn't pretend that we're perfect. Policy-wise, we're trying to get there, and I think, you know, the Scots folk will catch up on that in terms of you know, across Scottish society. I still think by and large we're welcoming folk. There just are pockets of people in there that maybe are just always going to be right wing, but sometimes it's about personal circumstance that colours the way you see the world. And I think
and then that's the kind of example, the reason, the thinking way I was thinking. I was also thinking, well, then every now and again you just get these incredibly heartfelt examples of people. Well, I'm thinking of the one was last year, wasn't it, when, you know, over on the other side of Glasgow from where I am, you know, and the Home Office is trying to do its early morning raids, and the whole streets out there stopping them. I mean,
that gladdened your heart, didn't it? It just made me well up at the time, and I think I likened it in my own head to the, you know, when you know, dawn raids in other circumstances decades ago in European countries, but you would have those early warning systems. And that's what happened in Glasgow.
Yeah.
There was an early warning system that went out, and then all the message went out, and then everybody was able to amass in the streets to do what they did. And I think that, to me, that shows that solidarity that we have with people who are here, seeking a country of peace. And, they just want to do what we take for granted. And I think all of us are recognizing right now with what's happening in Ukraine that we can't take it for granted. We can't take that, the fact that we can go about our lives the way that we choose for granted. So absolutely, I think that was an outpouring and a demonstration of, basically at its heart what Scotland's about.
Thinking about that outpouring that's going on from Ukraine, which is just so tragic, actually, watching what's happening there. But let's hope that we manage to get some of those Ukrainians into Scotland. And I think there are some orphans that are coming into Edinburgh, I think, at the moment.
Yes, so orphans from Dnipro are
Yes.
coming into Edinburgh. And thank goodness the UK government actually allowed that to happen. And Scottish local authorities will work together with third sector partners and the Scottish government to make sure that they've got a fantastic welcome. And I just think we can't forget what's happening in Afghanistan. We can't forget what's happening in Yemen. We need to remember that there's people around this world who are facing the most horrific situations. And although we opened our hearts for Syrian refugees under the resettlement scheme there, and we'll do the same just now with, as a super sponsor if we can be for Ukrainian people, but we can't forget the other folk.
Yeah, indeed. Thank you so much for coming and talking to us. I should have probably said at the beginning of everything this that our congratulations at having won the constituency and sitting there in Holyrood, and it's great having folk like yourself there, Elena. And thanks again for coming on the programme.
Thanks very much for that. And I think the more that we get people with different experiences and women and intersectionality, all of that into our parliaments, that's how we make the best decisions.
Yeah, great.
Wasn't that a lovely vision for the future? The idea of us being an open and welcoming country with humane and compassionate rules is something I can certainly get behind.
Yes, indeed. Me too. I found that last section of the interview particularly moving. And given what's on our screens at the moment coming from what's happening in Ukraine, it's just even more poignant.
And one of the points that came through from most of the speakers at the Stand Up to Racism rally, and I think perhaps Elena made it as well, was why is everybody opening their hearts to Ukrainians and not Syrians, Yemenis, Afghans? Everybody is in that same situation. And this sort of outpouring that we're getting, particularly from Westminster, they seem to be taking a much more welcoming line.
To be fair, it's also, you could also point out that for the most part, Ukrainians want to go back to Ukraine. Like, they don't want to come over and be living, as citizens and in whether it's the UK or Poland or wherever. They want to get back to their country. So in a way, it's not quite the same situation. But I think what it does point out is that there are very, very good reasons why people choose to, throw themselves on, whether it's small boats or desert journeys, and it's because their country isn't working for them. I think that raises a broader point that how do we help people in those countries to make those countries a place where they want to go back and, develop it and help their fellow countrymen. And I mean, some of them will want to stay here as well, but and then there's all the other problems, just like, countries that are falling apart because they've fallen into the hands of whether it's politicians or warlords or something who are basically in it for themselves. Yeah.
So not an easy one to sort. I think Elena acknowledged as well in her chat there.
Yeah.
So, however, we want to be an open and welcoming country, and
yes,
we might not be able to solve everything straight away, but we can certainly do a better job of it than the current incumbents down the road, I think.
Indeed.
And just to finish, a bit of a lighter note, because these are serious subjects we've been discussing here. There's something that you might have seen if you ever go on Twitter. This is the Scottish citizenship test. Do you want to be Scottish? Yes or no?
That's
If
it,
you
yes.
say yes, you're in. If you say no, you do.
That's it. That's it. Indeed, it's good. I like that one.
I love that. Okay, so that's us finishing on a slightly lighter note, but thank you very much to our guest this month, Elena Whitham, and also to the speakers at the Stand Up to Racism rally. You're probably watching this on Independence Live's YouTube channel, but there's also a podcast version, which is on our podcast channel, and you can get it wherever you get your podcasts. And we've just launched our new podcast website, which is part of the Independence Live website at independencelive.net. So if you'd like to know a bit more about what we do, certainly on the podcast side, please go and check that out. And thanks for watching, and we'll see you all again next month.
Yes, indeed.